recently.
Yeah, and that's actually the point. When we invested in Series A, Fred said, I've done 2 companies already. I won't be the best leader.
He was the co-founder of Withings.
Withings and
Nokia 200
and CRPAC before. So very successful entrepreneur. And one of the first things he said is like, I won't be the best leader past about 200 employees. And at the time, the company had only 25. And I've not met many founders who can tell that like very early on, and actually sold the company when it was about 250 employees, right at the right time.
Can you disclose the number? Is it still confidential?
It's
But what's interesting about these acquisitions that I noticed is that they got acquired by Legrand, which is kind of electrical product company. And Fred Potter, so the founder of that smart device company, became this kind of CTO within Legrand,
yes,
and in charge of those innovative projects. So that's another thing that's probably beyond the topic of today, is that how do you make a successful acquisition? Because all those companies that are being built, most of them are going to get acquired if they're successful. About 90% are going to go through acquisition, maybe less than 10% going to be IPO. And the integration and offering an interesting and motivating career track to the CEOs and the founders of the teams you acquire is really critical. And I think one of the friction points in the market today, in deep tech, including in deep tech, is that there's now, since it's touching so many sectors, many of those industry players are not really comfortable with buying startups. Some of them, they look at a company like, why would I buy a company that doesn't have revenue or that's not profitable? Like, we still have this kind of traditional business CFO mentality in a lot of places. And then even if they buy, then the integration is not going necessarily super well. So that's this kind of the end of the funnel, but in a way, it's really important because if we invest at the beginning of the funnel, there needs to be an exit somewhere.
I think on this one, the Netaplo example is a good one because Legrand was actually an investor in the Series B. And at the time they said, we could acquire the company, but we would break it. We don't know how
too early for them.
It's too early for them. We want to be associated. There are good synergies, but now would be too early. And then they learn how to work together, and as you know, they acquired in the end.
Yeah, that's often the path to acquisitions, to actually do business together and start to appreciate and see that there's kind of a matching of not only interest but also matching of cultures. Ideally,
I think it's hard to maintain the full leadership team of an entrepreneurial team after acquisition.
Yeah.
I think the best you could hope for is 2 or 3 years of transition. Hopefully they've built a lasting company, business, technology that lives on. It doesn't require them to be present for it to continue.
Yeah, I remember having that conversation as well with John Chambers, who did 180 M&As. His strategy was to find matching cultures and also startups that would build kind of the next generation of something. And the approach was to try to keep the leaders so that you don't just acquire today's leading product, but also you keep the leaders so that they build tomorrow's leading product in the category. And they were fairly successful at retaining talent. I think you mentioned about 1/3 of their top leaders were actually from acquisitions, which is quite remarkable. And could imagine that at some point there were maybe 100 startup CEOs working at Cisco, which is kind of insane. Okay, but that's very far away from today's topic. So let's get back to deep tech. So what are the sectors for you that are most attractive? Do you keep we keep a very open mind because we didn't expect to do robotics, we didn't expect to do med tech, and now we're doing a lot of it. So what's your approach to the different sectors? Do you read TechCrunch to see what's hot so that you can invest? What's the approach? AR, VR, any trackers, anybody?
We were talking about this earlier. I think those technologies that meet future needs. If you're looking at those, smart cities. You're looking at ag tech. The food production, protein food production over the next by 2050 will need to double. You've got a sustainability aspect built into there. So ag tech for us is a big area of focus. Smart cities platforms. How do we, with the mass migration of people moving into cities, how do you manage that? How do you control that? Communications, sensors, air pollution, all hugely topical.
So you're looking at basically global transformation, urbanization, pollution, food, those very deep underlying trends.
As well as the industrial sector, yes.
Okay.
And we primarily invest in B2B. I mean, Cocoon, one of our companies, and one of our co-investments is in the office. But we will invest in B2C,
yeah.
B2C if there is a B2B2C or B2B business back there. So Food Marvel and Cocoon are two very good examples of that. And disruption in the health tech sector, health tech and the automation, pulling the technology out of the hospitals, out into the public domain, with the millennials being able to self-diagnose and look at going to a GP or locally. We see a huge opportunity to move all of that expertise, at least in the early stages, from the medical facilities into the public domain.
Chris, what do you think? So, how do you find what to invest in? What are the sectors that you care most about?
I mean, everybody has their own information diet. I probably use Twitter more than most sources because you can kind of curate your information sources. Of course, being in the business now for 14 years, you just get a lot of inbound deal flow from past interactions.
So your inbound kind of gives you a sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
But you might have also like thesis, like
sure.
Matthew mentioned around.
Yeah, electrification of transport and autonomy are two big drivers. We think not just autonomy and transportation of people, but also goods, whether that be freight trucking, whether that be transportation in goods yards or warehouses, or these sorts of things. I think robotics in general is a huge kind of mega trend. Applied artificial intelligence, IoT and sensors. Cybersecurity, all these are rich fields that have lots of subsegments which are interesting. I mean, agri-tech in some cases can be the kind of like the factory model of agriculture when it's indoor farming at least. So I think there's plenty of opportunity. I think we are generalists, and we do look at sometimes there's an age-old question of are you a horse or a jockey investor? The truth is that both the horse and the jockey have to be excellent to win the race. So I don't think you can really choose.
Good. Kerry?
I mean, pretty much every single thing as we mentioned. We are generalists, but we're just definitely looking for that very, very hard to copy IP, that really protectable power. What is it? And we just love anything in data that's creating unique data sets. And we can work with those guys and those scientists incredibly well. But in terms of the actual sector, like you, cyber, fintech, IoT.
So on the data bit, we've been looking at the portfolio in hardware, and what we've seen is that there's very few companies that manage to monetize just data. And how do you see that going in deep tech? Because there might be a generation of lots of data, but maybe the insights are not so easy to get, or maybe the insights are not valued or not used in the right way. So do you see those companies that might have great data but can't get insights or can't get the value for the insights? That's something that happens.
Absolutely, and I mean, this is the only panel I've been on. Everyone's mentioned AgTech, for example. So we've got a great company in AgTech, Kiss and Hub, and they're getting real insights into data. So with the data they're seeing, they're able to predict the actual yield before it's actually announced to the buyers. Now, when you have stuff like this is really making an incredible impact. And then you've got, yes, of course, you can generate.
I think what you said is right spot on. It's prediction. There's so many companies who say we've got big data, but actually what they do is they're tracking what's happening, which is quite pointless. What's really added value is predicting and recommendation that a form of actionable insight can be used.
So in industry, for example, like things around predictive maintenance,
definitely,
are very, very popular through sensors or like connected machines that definitely track the vibration, the sound, the electricity, like the consumption, to see whatever discrepancy is going. Okay, and in terms of, so we touched already a lot of topics, and are there sectors that you feel are really overhyped in deep tech?
I think we started talking about this before the panel, of course. I mean, I think the challenge here is that, of course, some of the areas these companies operate in will be transformational for the company that gets it right. But when we talk about overhyped or underhyped, we're talking about an entire category rather than an individual surfer of the wave who might be the winner. I think quantum computing comes to mind as one of these. Where
I was hesitant, should I bring a quantum investor on the panel? I thought, because was that as deep as it gets these days.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe it's too specialized. And they're kind of mostly building software on machines that barely exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, still 3 to 5 years away.
We're at least 3 to 5 years away.
It's a timing thing.
And sometimes, probably never for some approaches. Some approaches are probably dead ends. And the one that wins is probably 3 to 5 years away.
So maybe it's the next Bitcoin. Maybe now is the time, to buy early.
That's a perfect example of a
Hype curve.
Well, it's still-
hype curve that's already gone to the
Even at
bottom.
like 5 or 8,000, it's still thousands of times what it was a decade ago. So, question.
And I
what's the
think
question
investors
there?
internally go off of trends a little bit before it becomes mainstream.
Mhm.
So I think blockchain is very challenged now in the media,
Mhm.
but I think there's already a rumble among
I think
investors.
crypto is
some
very
months
challenging in the
before.
media. Blockchain is
I think there's still
misunderstood.
people that believe that blockchain is over-applied to areas where it doesn't isn't
I
required.
agree.
I think that's the main.
I'll do a quick kind of survey here. Do we have any blockchain investors in the room? So one, a few. Any quantum investors?
We've looked. We've looked.
Look is not investment.
Interesting.
Not full of circles.
I met a gentleman who built a quantum-focused fund called Quantum Nation. I actually almost had him on a panel in France, but then I thought it was probably too specialized for that. But it's interesting, yeah. I mean, maybe in 10 years you'll be a billionaire and you'll buy us a drink.
Very long time focus.
Yeah. But I think for a lot of VC it's actually quite challenging because even the go-to-market is tight, and you're not sure the company is going to be able to finance beyond the first round in some categories. So you really have to have enough capital
I
and
think
confidence.
the best investments are usually non-consensus, right?
Mm.
So it's plugging out that gem in a kind of unpopular category can sometimes be the best way to go. I mean, I think if you look at virtual reality, which you mentioned earlier, it had a giant hype wave and then kind of didn't quite meet expectations, and now it's kind of come off the boil. But one of my first investments in my new fund has actually been a virtual reality company, which took a very different approach to the market. Because I think companies have been trying to deliver virtual reality for console.
I tried it in Vienna. Vario.
It's called Vario.
Sure, how they pronounce it in Finnish.
Vario. It's Finnish for shadow. It's the world's best virtual reality headset, but it's targeted at industrial and professional users, where the price is not a barrier.
It's like thousands of dollars.
It's like $6,000 instead of $600, and it has a leapfrog of resolution. It uses
It's like Retina.
well, it uses eye tracking to figure out where you're looking, and then it shows an ultra high resolution image wherever your eyes are moving. And it
Yeah, I
blends
tried
that-
it. It was very, very realistic. I was like was the simulation? It was in I think it was an air controller or something like
Yeah.
that, and I could see all the dials and all the radar stuff, and everything was very, very realistic.
If you're replacing a $20 million flight simulator, then $6,000 is a bargain.
That's true. It's pretty cheap, and then you can do it like distributed and it's interesting. So and it's interesting because like VR, AR, that's one of the things media keeps talking about a lot. And I mean, I'm really interested in VR. I tried a bunch of headsets. I bought the Oculus, and still trying to find what interesting thing to do aside from watching Netflix on my bed. Actually, there's a few apps that are kind of interesting, but very few have retention.
Yeah.
Very few want to go back to because it's fun or because you learn something. Haven't really found that many.
Yeah, that's why we're not looking for consumer use cases.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it isn't a consumer use case yet for most people.
And in the device category, basically you went for something that was 10 times more, 10 times higher resolution,
Exactly.
basically. So 10x factors,
10x
something.
price,
that
10x
was,
resolution.
Yeah. And okay, interesting. And any other comments on like overhyped categories or things that are past their curve? The next big thing.
I agree with the quantum being slightly overhyped at the moment, and I think we're just seeing ridiculous valuations, and going back to that longevity in deep tech, when you start to see all of these valuations coming really, really high, you start to see new entrants into that shouldn't really take on a quantum. So not like David over there, because he absolutely should take on quantums, who has got quantum investment. He works for the university, it's probably better for you explaining exactly what you do. But guys like this should be taking those investments because they understand how to work with this particular type and profile of founder, which takes a particular set of skills. And we're just seeing loads of valuation, a lot of hype. There will be a winner, but you just have to pick your moment when to invest.
Same goes for Fusion. Like,
Fusion.
please deliver me Fusion.
And
Invest, yeah.
autonomous cars, autonomous vision. And there are so many sensors. Who's going to be the winner? But if you look at, to your point, Chris, the logistics, the warehousing, the more industrial, that is reality. Companies are investing in this space. There is a need for it.
Yeah, there's your pain point.
There is a pain point.
Amazon has like 100,000 Kiva robots deployed.
Exactly.
Putting robots
Exactly.
for pallets as well.
And companies are willing to spend. So the commercial, you don't have to make the significant investments. They don't need as much capital to get to market. And you can realize those investments a lot more rapidly than the big, sexy autonomous cars, which are hugely competitive and everyone is vying for.
How about another category we ended up doing quite a lot in that we didn't expect is health. And a lot of investors are hesitant because they're like, oh, FDA takes ages, it costs a lot of money, it's very difficult to get into the reimbursement thing. So what do you think about health tech? And health tech devices or
The other
therapeutics?
side of the scene is that cycles can also be very long. But on the other hand, as you mentioned before, companies can be actually acquired way before they actually get commercialized. So it's a different bet.
They barely register on TechCrunch actually.
Exactly, they don't have time.
But they sell, some company got acquired for $2 billion.
I think we invested 4.5 years ago in a company that does a device for sleep apnea. The place that they're never going to commercialize it, they're going to be acquired before.
We also have an investment in sleep apnea.
I know.
A different one.
A different one.
But it's actually no. Ours for the initial focus is snoring reduction.
Yeah.
But can also sleep apnea is a medical condition, so medical claim means FDA. Snoring, not quite a medical condition, so you can go to market much faster.
Our play medical differently. Yeah.
Okay. And so some medical companies actually take that route. They decide to actually have less claims so that they can go to market faster. And then we have one that's a little bit interesting. It's a French company doing it's a soft robotics. It's kind of a robotic corset for back pain. And initially, because they were targeting back pain, of course, was medical and the certification was very long. As they were doing that, they discussed with industry players and they said, actually, we're more interested in the prevention of back pain than the treatment for people who do like repetitive work with arms up or standing a lot. And then they basically did another certification in the middle as basically a machine rather than a medical device. And that actually works really well. As it turns out, maybe the biggest market will not be the back pain business, even though it's huge, and the number one cause for people missing work. It's maybe going to be industry. So kind of interesting different routes also even for medical.
But that's where I think you're right, and where most of those companies, if they start in B2C rather than just being a medical company, they can get some early traction, they can sell devices, they can start gathering data. The regulatory approval process is so long and fraught with difficulty that most of these companies will fail if they try and go for regulatory approval. Some need to, but if you are selling to the open market, building a medical device in the background, you can go through, gather that data, learn from the consumers, get a better understanding, build up the intelligence around that, and have a data set that then you can rely on to launch into the medical market.
So it's that's one path, and there's some of medical device companies go this way, and some others go the medical. Like for example, we have one that's really interesting because they started with sleep tech. It's basically a mask that uses measurement of heart rate variability. They use light patterns and sound patterns to basically put your brain in a state of flow so that you don't feel chronic pain for people who have physical chronic pain or mental health problems. And the founder himself is actually built that technology for himself after he had a terrible car accident and ended up in a wheelchair and given 5 years life expectancy because of lack of sleep. And for basically 2 years, they were trying to pitch as a sleep tech company and saying, oh yeah, that can help you sleep in 10 minutes, but it doesn't always work, but it reduces your pain. Eventually, they honed onto the right message, which was, this is chronic pain management tool. It's nothing about sleep. And it hit perfectly with the opioid epidemic in the US. Basically, it's pain reduction without pills. So now they have a lot of traction, and it's a company called Sana. Highlighted the examples earlier that had too little time to develop. And it's really interesting to see that in some cases you can pivot your message and your target market and find more resonance. And also time, the market changes around you, and sometimes you time it well because you started early. You heard of the examples of PushMe, started focusing on the fleet of e-bikes and eventually caught the wave of the e-scooters. So that's kind of like the, maybe one more question before we turn to the audience for questions is, how about the timing? How do you time? Do you have examples of companies that you invested in, you were really motivated, really excited, and were like, oh, this is great, and then timing didn't work out? Like, how do you look at timing? Maybe Chris.
I think our timing interest to enter depends a little bit on the risk profile of the technology and how and also the downstream fundability of it. So I think in Vario, the company we mentioned earlier, that was a B round, but it was pre-product. So,
B round, pre-product.
Yeah, so it was so complex. It's got moving parts, hardware, software. You have ultra low latency, ultra high resolution. They couldn't deliver that in just one cycle. And so in that case, we did a pre-product investment. In other cases, if it was SaaS software, then you want cohorts and traction, and it's a totally different game. So I think it really depends on tech risk, how much tech risk you want to take. For us, I think we're comfortable if it's sort of like 6 months pre-release, but not if it's 3 years pre-release. That's our
3 years is awful, because then seed 1, seed 2, bridge, and maybe nothing.
And then if you think about like battery technology, another kind of undervalued, underhyped thing that if it were improved would be dramatically better. We made an investment in a company called Sila Nanotechnologies, which is an additive which can increase the capacity of the lithium-ion battery by 30%. Imagine if every battery was 30% better. That's a dramatic improvement. But we would never have made that in a seed investment because battery companies, die at tremendous rates, especially in the early stages. That was a much later stage investment.
Okay. Maybe
also another barrier to entry. GraphCore develops an AI chipset. You can't really catch up with them if you're not already in that game. So we invested in Series A when there was only a simulator, so there was no silicon. Atomico then followed us, and then Sequoia still invested. There was still no chipset. If you were waiting for the chipset, you would have paid 1.5 billion, which the guys did last year. But because it takes a lot of time, doing a tape out at this kind of nanometer takes about 5 million every time you do it. So it's a matter of the establishing of barrier to entry to guarantee that nobody's going to catch up.
And have enough capital to be patient and confident that there's a market. But you're confident there's a market behind it, right?
On this one, there was a big market behind it.
Get the right investors in alongside you at the early stage. If you know it could take a little bit longer, which you can, get the right investors alongside you. And one of the big things that I always say to the founders is, if it's a really cool company, lots of people want to invest. And sometimes they get too many people to invest at the same time, and then that founder